Good afternoon, and welcome to the second public meeting of the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee. The Open Government Federal Advisory Committee is a federal advisory committee subject to the Federal Advisory Committee Act. My name is Arthur Brunson, and I am the designated federal officer, or DFO, and Daniel York serves as the alternate DFO for this committee. As part of my role as the DFO, I manage the day-to-day administrative operations of the committee. I attend all committee meetings and ensure the committee operates in full compliance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act. The Open Government Federal Advisory Committees has 15 members, and that composition includes 11 special government employees and 4 regular government employees. The purpose of the OGFAC is to advise GSA on open government initiatives, including GSA's creation, implementation, and monitoring of U.S. open government national action plans and commitments. Additionally, the OGFAC will advise GSA's administrator on emerging open government issues, challenges, and opportunities supporting the U.S. Open Government Secretariat. A reminder for all OGFAC members, please keep your line muted and to unmute yourself when it's your turn to speak. State your name to help the public identify who is speaking. We also ask that you update your name in the Zoom to include member if you haven't already. Members also, when you like to ask a question or make a comment, use the raise hand feature by clicking the reaction box at the bottom of your screen and wait to be acknowledged before speaking. All audience participants who have signed up to provide virtual oral comments, please be reminded you are asked to use no more than 3 minutes of time for your oral public comments, and you will be timed. We currently have 4 requests from the public who wish to provide comments. The opportunity to provide your comment is scheduled to start at approximately 3:30 p.m. When that time comes, we will display a slide listing the order of who is talking. Thank you in advance for making the public comments period a smooth process. As a reminder, this meeting is open to the public and is being recorded. The recording will not include the break and will be posted as a part 1 and part 2 due to the size of the video file. A copy of the recording, along with the meeting minutes and a list of attendees, will be posted to our website. And that website is www.gsa.gov/USOpenGov. That's GSA.gov/USOPENGOV in the coming days. Before I go over the agenda, I'd like to confirm that the committee members' attendance has been reviewed and a quorum has been established. Members not present have a strike-through over their names. As previously mentioned, a list of all attendees will be posted to our website. On the agenda today, we will have opening remarks from the committee chair, a report out of 3 preparatory meetings of the previous pre-preparatory meetings, and then a 10-minute break. After the break, there will be an overview of the timeline for developing the 6th U.S. Open National Action Plan and overview of results of the NAP6 RFI. A future presentation discussion, use of Google Documents discussion, and have oral public comments. As we prepare to hear from the OGFAC chair, I would like to say thank you to all of our presenters, attendees, and stakeholders for joining us today, including those who will provide public comments. There were no public comments submitted to OGFAC at gsa.gov's mailbox. And at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the meeting over to the OGFAC chair, Mr. Daniel Schuman. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you so much for kicking us off. It's good to see everyone. We had a productive month, I think. Where all of us, or just about all of us, got together and met in preparatory meetings. So a lot of this month's meetings will be focused on reporting out the analysis that came from there and trying to figure out what to do next. As Arthur indicated, we'll also be hearing about the NAP6 timeline. We'll be thinking about who else we want to have speak to this committee in the future. We'll be discussing if there are ways that we can collaborate through electronic means such as Google Documents, as well as hearing from the public and a couple of other things. I'm going to try to keep this meeting on track. We've got a lot to cover. Just because of the nature of the way the Zoom is setting up, if you've got something to say, certainly raise your hand and I can see that. There is as we discussed before, there's a non-public chat, so like you can flag it there as well, and I'll make sure to put you in the queue. I'll try to do it in the order in which people sort of indicate what they're interested in. A couple developments from the last meeting. There is now a place where if there are documents that we want to share with the public, there's now an online library. So if there are things that any of you would like to flag for the public to be able to see, you can send it to Arthur and me. And for members of the public, you can always email ogfac@gsa.gov. That's a good way to draw documents or things to share for our attention as well. So with that, you don't need to hear from me more. So I think that what we should do is go into the report backs from the preparatory meetings, and we'll start with Amy. So if you're ready, I'd love to hand it over to you.
Yes, great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we had a very productive month, as you indicated, Daniel. And so I'm here to represent the conversation that we had on the committee structure. Other members who attended the committee structure meeting were Ron Kiefover and Stephen Cull, and then Daniel Schumann, and then the support team from the GSA support team. So today I just will share with you all a quick update on our discussion and for the group. So if we could go to the next slide. We met to really think and talk about the structure of whether we should have subcommittees and the duties that that would entail. So that was the purpose of what we came together to do. So we can go to the next slide. And the questions we talked about in our discussion was, should our OG Open Government Federal Advisory Committee have subcommittees? What subcommittees should there be? We talked a little bit about how often they should meet. And we also discussed whether there were good examples from other federal advisory committees on that we could draw from in other best practices. So we had a good discussion. If we go to the next slide, tried to recap some of the high points, which we did talk about some of our past experiences on subcommittee structures. Really, we focused on thematic subcommittees structures, which some other facts have had around themes in open government and large topics. Also functionally sort of task and activity driven subcommittees, and also large topics. And some of the priority areas that we discussed were obviously artificial intelligence is really top of mind across the open government communities, and also public service delivery modernization and how we can be open and transparent in the work being done there and engaging with the public in meaningful ways. And then we had a nice discussion also around rethinking public participation in open government and citizen assembly. So a lot of good thoughts there around priority areas. And then we also talked about how are we going to build into the subcommittee structure, measuring the impact of the work that happens. And we thought that was also something that was important. So if we go to the next slide, I can just share kind of the readout of what we kind of concluded or what we wanted to bring forward to this group. Was we settled on, the potential of 3 subcommittees. And the structure that we also settled on for sharing back with the group was a subcommittee on a retrospective review of past national action plans impact and what was included in that, certainly a large body of great work to draw on from past efforts. So having a dedicated group looking at that. Clearly, I think a subcommittee on the formation of the new National Action Plan recommendations could make good sense. Someone to organize all of that and bring all our best thinking together is what we discussed. And then the last one is how we thought we might manage all of the emerging issues that we see in the open government landscape, and having a subcommittee that could support that review on things like AI, public engagement and participation, and service delivery. So, and other topics that may come up, that was a broad enough group that could capture and be able to make space for those kinds of discussions that are certainly important. So that is a quick readout of what we discussed and what we wanted to bring back to the full committee for review and discussion. So Daniel, I can turn it back to you unless, I would say in this discussion, if to my fellow meeting members, if there was anything I omitted that you also wanted to share, I would certainly want you to speak up, and we had a good discussion. I want to make sure all the best ideas were coming forward. So with that, Daniel, I can turn it back to you.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. So taking a cue from you, one, if there are other folks who participated in the preparatory meeting who wanted to raise anything else that was discussed at that meeting, I think Amy did a great job summarizing and synthesizing the conversation. But if there are questions that folks have, if there are other folks from the preparatory meeting who want to raise things that may have not been included or to emphasize something differently, this is a great time to do so. Just raise your hand and I will gladly call on you. And I'll just wait a couple seconds. Okay, well, if something changes and you want to speak up, certainly feel free to do so. Oh, Charlie, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I did not participate in the preparatory meeting, so I did want to give the opportunity to anyone who did participate to, as you suggested, share anything that they wanted to share, emphasize any particular points. But not having participated, just having now heard the readout, thank you very much for meeting, those of you that did, to talk through potential subcommittee structures. I love the idea of doing a retrospective review of past NAP action items and the impact that they may have had, and taking into consideration things that are maybe in motion or things that we want to carry through. I also think having a subcommittee that focuses on emerging open government issues and having a forum to carry through on some of those initial conversations that I think you started having with respect to rethinking public participation and public assembly, looking at artificial intelligence and any other issues that you would explore in that, I think also make a lot of sense. The second subcommittee on new NAP recommendations, I'd like to better understand the vision for that, because in my mind, the first one and the second one that we just talked about and that I just spoke about, the retrospective and the forward-looking one, might themselves, I see, be leading towards potential NAP recommendations. And I wonder if we need to have a subcommittee to look at new NAP recommendations, or if, based on the work of those subcommittees, you do the retrospective review, and that group, that subcommittee says, well, these are our recommendations for what we think should be included in the NAP. The Emerging and Open Government Issues team subcommittee does a similar review and says, these are the recommendations that we think should be included in the next National Action Plan. And we tee those up for the full committee for consideration. And we listen to the reason for the recommendation and mull it over, and then maybe vote on what we think should be included or not. I'm just wondering, what your vision is for this subcommittee for new NAP recommendations, and why you think that we need that as opposed to being able to consider them as a full committee.
I can start, and then I would welcome Daniel if you want to add to it, because I think you were also part of our discussion, but also could represent some of the full committee's actions as well. But I think our intention was to help organize some of the recommendations that come in for that second subcommittee, and it would be to then bring it to the full committee for consideration. But it's more of like an organizing function, given that there's going to be a lot of, I hope, great engagement with the public and ideas from across the committee and the public. And so it's more of an organizing for the full committee, is I think what we discussed and had in mind. But I would invite Daniel for your thoughts here too, because I think you might have more to share.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is in alignment with yours, Amy. That it made sense to have people that were focused on pieces of it. So like the retrospective review isn't just for looking at NAP 5 and NAP 4, but like when we have in a year when we make our recommendations, or whatever time we make our recommendations, we want to look back at implementation, having someone focus on implementation of those new recommendations makes sense. So like this isn't just looking forward to the NAP 6, but it's looking forward to the NAP 6, the NAP 7, the NAP, like as this process continues on forward, including challenge issues. Sometimes it will be more active, I suspect, and sometimes it will be less active. But its purpose is to tee up and do a lot of the hard work so that they can then be presented to the full committee for conversation. And I should say, like, we can do this a lot of different ways. The subcommittee can have every member of the full committee on it. It doesn't have to be like, there's lots of ways that we can sort of structure it, depending on what's going on at the particular time. It seemed to make conceptual sense, because the focus of the work that we're charged with is both the emerging issues as well as addressing this NAP and then the future NAPs. It doesn't have to be this way. It was just a way that seemed to make logical sense at the time. But I'm open to all different approaches to make sure that we can do this right. Charlie, did you want to say more before? If not, then I'll go on to Corinna.
Feel free to go on if no one else has any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Corinna.
Hi, thanks so much. I think this is really a wonderful way to sort of divide up this work. I'm wondering though, if there's any sort of consideration about the sort of recommendations to NAP about decoupling it explicitly from a national action plan, given that the timing of when the national action plan is supposed to come out and the longer scope of the committee's work is, I just wondering if there is like a way to think about this as best practices for action plans, or if you were conceptualizing this as more as specifically targeted to get it done for the work of the upcoming action plan.
Amy, would you like to respond, or would you like me to respond?
You can go, Daniel, if you like. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I can go first. And then others, please feel encouraged to weigh in, agree, disagree, or have other perspectives. So one, we'll be talking later about the timeline. Like, I have real concerns about the NAP timeline and how that's going to function. And sorry, I'm looking for my agenda. That's an agenda item for later on that we're going to talk about, is the NAP 6 timeline and how that functions. Because I think there's real challenges inherent in that. But I think that there's parallel processes. So there's, as issues emerge, so the NAP is a collaborative process between the US government and civil society to go and create a series of recommendations that then go through a bureaucratic process. It's the Open Government Partnership. That is part of what we do, but also making recommendations on an ongoing basis is also part of what we do. So I was thinking that the emerging issues folks, in part, like, it's not tied to while it overlaps with the NAP, if there are things that don't make the NAP, if there isn't something that has just happened, like there's a news story about whatever, and we need to address it, we don't need to push it through the Open Government Partnership process. If it doesn't align with the timeframe, there may be opportunities to weigh in more quickly, to make recommendations to the administrator, to whatever it is that we decide to do. So that's why I was thinking, like, one is like emerging issues. So if there's a thing we need to do right now, we do that right now. Sorry, I don't mean to clap at you. The other is like, if there are things that fit more into this 2 to 3 year cycle, then we're engaged with the 2 to 3 year cycle. And all of this gets synthesized at the full committee level. So like everybody's kind of focused on their particular piece of it, but all of us together collectively decide what we're doing with the different things and how we want to prioritize it. So that's the thinking, if that makes any sense.
No, that's really helpful, and I think does make a lot of sense. I appreciate the explanation.
And Amy, I know I'll get to you and Josh in
Yeah.
one second. Did you want to
No,
add?
I think you summarized it well, and I think the points raised by our colleagues is also well taken. I think we should, make sure we frame it in a way that can capture the work that needs to be done and keep it as, I think I'm still learning about how all the process steps go with this, but I think we can be flexible to make sure it kind of meets what we need to deliver when. But that I think was the goal of the second piece, the second subcommittee.
Thank you. Josh.
Hey, so last time we heard about the administrative difficulty of creating subcommittees and having the administrator appoint people to subcommittees. So I'm wondering if there was any thought about that and whether we would potentially structure non-subcommittee groups, right? Like, should we continue the preparatory meeting style until those subcommittees are formally approved? And if they're not, if they're not constituted, how do we keep doing our work effectively?
That is the $64,000 question. And the answer is, in my opinion, is yes, right? Like the preparatory meetings, to the extent that they have things to do. So like this preparatory meeting, which was about structure, it doesn't have to meet every month, but if we have an issue that arises with respect to structure, then the folks who are on the preparatory meeting would be able to come back together, or other folks, as they're interested, to go and address the structural question. But I think that with respect to certainly like the oversight of like emerging issues and looking back, like the look back to me lines up really nicely with the committee evaluation work, like what the rubric is. Like those two things, it seems like as you think about the rubric, that's very close to like, did we accomplish the things that were committed to previously, and are the things worth coming back? So I see like some of the preparatory meeting work will continue until the committees get stood up, and then some of that will slide into the committee, and some of it will continue as sort of a side thing depending on the needs of all of us together. Does that make sense?
I was thinking having preparatory meetings that are aligned with, if we decide that we want these 3 subcommittees, we don't have to wait until they're approved if we have preparatory work. So we could form preparatory groups that are aligned with the new subcommittees, for example.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Or some of it we can hold at the full committee level. Just depend, like, if there's nothing major that happens in open government in the next 60 days, then we don't necessarily need to have we can do it in the we can do it at the full committee level, not the emerging level. But like, yes, I think, so the next step, if people agree that this structure makes sense, which I'm not sure that folks will, I want to make sure there's an opportunity for that conversation. The next step then would be between this meeting and the next meeting, I would ask for volunteers for folks who might want to serve on these different things. And I would work in the background with Arthur and Dan York to go and request that, to start doing the paperwork to set up these things. Because it will take 2 to 3 months, I think, for that process to work its way through. Does that track? Okay. Amy?
Yeah, just one other item that we kind of discussed that I thought was important, just especially if we are, moving forward with these subcommittees or any subcommittees. I think you said this, or someone from Arthur's team may have shared this, but you can be on a subcommittee, but you can also, if you're not a member of it, you can attend still. So if a topic, like an emerging topic is like your issue and you really want to join, even though you're not on that subcommittee, you can still join and be a part of it. Is that right? And maybe some touching on just like how that would work would be helpful to others. I thought it was helpful.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Arthur, but my understanding is that's exactly correct. And we can establish a committee norm where anybody can sit in on any subcommittee meeting. The subcommittee meetings themselves would be publicly available because that's the way subcommittee meetings work. So that anybody would be able to watch it, and we could have a norm for our subcommittees that committee members are able to participate in those meetings. They're just not able to vote. And that's the way that would work. Because it would, you need a majority of the subcommittee members to report something out. So if we have 15 members and if you have a 7-member subcommittee, then 4 members of the subcommittee can report something out. And if there's other people that aren't present, that are present but non-voting members, like they wouldn't count towards the quorum. But that's okay, right? That's a fine result. Does that, sorry about the structure stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's helpful. Helpful
Awesome.
for me too, just to clarify. So thank you.
Yeah. Other folks who want to chime in on this? Okay. I'm not seeing anyone at the moment. What I'd like to do, just get a sense of, and I can't see, unfortunately, because of the way Zoom is working, I can't see everyone's faces. Are folks comfortable with moving ahead on a vote on this to go and adopt this three subcommittee structure? Or let me do it the inverse. Is there anybody who's not comfortable at this time with going ahead and having a vote to establish these 3 subcommittees? Just raise your hand or chat at me or wave or something. I'm just trying to go through the video. All right, I don't see anybody who's uncomfortable. I'm just gonna wait one more moment just in case. And like,
Dan, this is Arthur. If you give me a second, I'd also suggest that if there is anyone who would like to cast that vote, since we can't see it, if you would put it in the chat, that would help us.
yes, that's a good point. Okay. Well, I don't see anyone. It's going to take us like 2 to 3 months to get this going anyway, right? Like, so like if it turns out this is a terrible idea, then we don't have to do it that way if people have second thoughts. But for now, I'd like to go ahead and have us vote on that. Arthur, do you have a preference? I can either say, does anyone have an objection? But I'd rather, or is there an easier way to just like have, oh, Ade, yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Dan. Ade Odutola. A quick question. Is this set in stone? Can we change our minds in a couple of, yeah. If you could talk about that, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So we can always change our minds. So anything that we do through a committee vote, we can undo through a committee vote. Obviously, requesting the administrator to set up these subcommittees is challenging because it takes time for that process to work its way through. Identifying who's going to be on the different ones is also challenging. I'm going to ask, so what I will do is, if people agree that the structure makes sense, what I'm then going to do is I'll put out a call for people to volunteer to serve on the subcommittees. And I don't necessarily, we'll see how it breaks down. Basically, like if it's, I don't mind having some committees which have a lot of people and some which have only a few people. Like that's not necessarily an issue because all the work is going to refer back to the full committee anyway. But we'll see sort of where the weight of interest is. If people want, assuming people want to participate in them, they may not want to participate in the subcommittee, which is also fine. But if it turns out that like creating a subcommittee on emerging issues is a really bad idea and we should just do it all at the full committee, then there is no reason to say that we can't get rid of the subcommittee. The only challenge arises, there are 2 challenges. One challenge arises having outside folks. We're not going to have outside folks, so that's not a problem. The other challenge arises is moving people around between the subcommittees. But since people are going to be able to participate anyway, they just won't be able to vote if they're not on the subcommittee, then it seems like that's fine. Like I think that works. Ade, does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, of course. All right, so
And this is Arthur. I just want to make one change or correction just before we move forward. That for the subcommittees, you'll be volunteering to participate in that committee, and then you would need to be appointed. So
right,
that will be the process.
Right, and the person who appoints is the GSA administrator. It's not me, right, Arthur? But I will be making recommendations.
Yeah, the DFO will be sending a package forward with these are the names that we've discussed that would like to be we believe should be on this committee, and ask her to he or her to appoint them.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, I mean, we can vote without Corinna. Although I would love to have her here, but it seems like I think we've got more than a quorum to vote regardless, and I don't think this is contentious. But let's go ahead and have a vote. Arthur, do you want to do it by, we can either go by each name if you'd like, or we can just do it unless there's an objection. Do you have a preference?
We're gonna do it by name, and when I call your name, just come off mute
And let me just be clear, what we're voting on now is to establish 3 subcommittees: a subcommittee on retrospective review, a subcommittee on new NAP recommendations, and a subcommittee on emerging open government issues. So we are not appointing people yet. That is the GSA. We're just requesting that the GSA administrator create these 3 subcommittees. Is everybody on? There's no confusion, right? Okay. All right, Arthur, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. I'll first start with aid.
Yes, Adeola Toye. Yes, I support the motion.
Thank you. Amy.
Yes, I approve.
Bobby.
Yes, I approve as well.
Charles.
I vote in favor.
Karina.
She's off for the moment.
Dan Schuman.
Aye.
Joyce.
Yes, I approve.
Christian.
Approve.
Stephen.
I approve.
Janice.
Yes, I approve.
John.
John Deerking is yes.
Josh.
Yes.
Kirill.
Yes.
Ron.
Yes.
Suzanne.
Yes.
That's everyone.
Okay, so that's 14 yes and 1 non-voting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. So the next step will be that I'll follow up with Arthur's help with an email to everyone for folks to express interest. You don't feel obligated to serve on any subcommittee. You are welcome to request to serve on more than one subcommittee if you wish to do so as well. And if you're interested in serving as chair, let me know as well. And so I'll follow up by email with Arthur to all of you so that we can work that out. Thank you all. So next, see, wasn't that fun? That wasn't too bureaucratic, right? Yay. Okay. So next we're going to go have a report back from Carol, who's going to talk about the committee evaluation preparatory meeting.
Thanks, Danielle. Yes, so we met in general to discuss how we should be thinking about and evaluating the various ideas that come to the committee at large through whichever sorts of processes we end up setting up. And I guess now we're going to have subcommittees notionally. So if we could go to the next slide. We were essentially, thank you, essentially guided by 2 motivating questions. One was, how do we think about what is and is not relevant to this broader umbrella of open government? And then 2, trying to think through, as we evaluate these ideas, how can we, or are there telltale signs that might suggest that they might be more or less successful or effective or impactful, whatever, however you'd want to measure that. But those were the 2 big questions we were considering in our discussion. Next slide, please. The first half of the meeting, we had a presentation from the OGP support unit where they talked a little bit about how they evaluate national action plans and the commitments and ideas that are in those. And then the second half, we had just a member discussion about this broader idea. Next slide, please. So the OGP presentation, it was led by Pepe Garcia, who's our country support coordinator for the Americas. And what Pepe talked about, he wanted to sort of have us think about NAPs and the commitments that are going into those. Not, the reforms in NAPs are not just discrete things, but rather OGP's seen success as when NAPs are thought of as a package of reforms that are sending a cohesive political message. That not like I said, not a commitment is not something in and of itself, but more successful when it's a part of a broader web of interconnected ideas. And what does he provide an overview of what OGP at least looks at when they're evaluating their commitments. He mentioned that they've got 3 core criteria when they're judging commitments. One was verifiability, that is whether the commitments clearly state the actions that are proposed as part of those efforts, and whether they have clear milestones as far as how that will be developed and implemented, those commitments. The second was relevance, how relevant the idea is to whatever aspect of open government we're trying to focus on with that commitment. The third was potential for results, and in that regard, he outlined that they had 3 categories as they consider what those potentials look like. He said that they have whether it's clear, modest, or substantial potential for results. They try and slot those commitments into one of those buckets. Next slide, please. So he talked a little bit about what kind of commitments are successful, or at least what has OGP experienced in the various evaluations that they've done through IRM and through other mechanisms. He highlighted that they have found that well-articulated, result-oriented strategic commitments are more likely to lead to change. So what is well-articulated and results-oriented for the purpose of these commitments? Those are commitments that describe a certain problem very well. The change that those commitments aim to make is within the scope of the commitment, that it's doable, and that the desired outputs are clearly described, right? That you want to understand the connection between the problem, what you want to do, and what you want to get out of it. What is strategic? He mentioned that OGP is interested in understanding both the feasibility of commitments as well as their ambition. He mentioned that they've got a priority on quote-unquote game-changing commitments, which generate binding and institutional changes across government. He's found that those, or OGP's found that those have been particularly worthwhile across the sort of global scope of OGP's national action plans. Some important considerations for better results that we discussed were whether these ideas are that are in the commitments are they're of significant importance to the country, right, to whatever political moment the country is experiencing, whether commitments involve the right people, the right agencies, whether they're feasible, whether we're being clear and explicit about the expected results in the text of the commitment. Those are all important considerations as we're, as at least as OGP is evaluating whether commitments might be impactful. Next slide. Some other lessons learned. We talked about categories for weighing commitment elements. He mentioned that they're broad and flexible from OGP's IRM standpoint. When people are happy with the result, both government and civil society, that's what's really important. And he also noted that government and civil society might differ, but so government wants a good grade, civil society pushes for bigger goals. He outlined that a successful process has government and civil society agreeing on the same policy areas before making specific commitments. The main point is to try and get government and civil society stakeholders to agree on the broad priorities and then slot things in after the fact, after you establish that. IRM, through their analysis, they found that regular action plans or in general, they've got between 5 and 15 commitments that and then of those, there's about 3 to 10 milestones in each, which describe how the commitment is going to be implemented. He stressed that it's important to set modest goals and expectations, and that's okay to do that. That we don't necessarily need to work toward every commitment having what they described as substantial potential for results. We've got to describe well the current situation, how things will be different with the commitment, to be very clear about those two pieces, the activities that should take us to the result as well. There might be situations where the commitment is fulfilled, but the change in the results are not as substantial as we expected or as we desired, which is why it's important to set goals and expectations at a modest level. Well-designed commitments will hopefully lead to those desired results, and the numbers should be ambitious but moderated. Next slide, please. These are some of the thematic areas that OGP is focused on right now as part of their global advocacy efforts, including this Open Government Challenge, which is 10 separate topic areas, from civic space to justice, media freedom, etc. He also outlined some other OGP resources that might come in handy for the committee to become familiar with. That includes the Open Gov Guide, which is a really tremendous resource on the OGP website, where there's dozens of thematic areas you can delve into that go through, and then each page sort of outlines, the existing commitments worldwide that are trying to implement that thematic topic, as well as some sample commitments, some things to think about. So there's really a wealth of information on the OGP site of things that are working well across the world. Next slide, please. And then we had some committee discussion, if we can move to the next slide. So we wanted to think about how we can work towards an evaluation framework, and we wanted to figure out how we can run a collaborative process between government and civil society that yields actions that are both doable and important. And in contrast to some prior national action plans, we noted that it could be important to have a more transparent process behind the committee's decision-making, with a defensible methodology without being overly mechanistic in that work. There was some great discussion on the sort of how we want to ideate these recommendations. One of the members of the preparatory meeting discussed what we were calling a quadrant mechanism. So the idea, for example, plotting an idea's level of effort versus its ambition or its impact, we considered it might be worth marrying ambition with impact. There's space for high impact, high effort ideas, and we wanted to think about how we can plot whatever ideas we have onto some sort of evaluation mechanism and figure out, okay, if this is an important variable for us, how does this idea measure up? Where does it measure up? Next slide, please. And so these are some of those possible dimensions which might work on a quadrant mechanism or something similar. We thought about level of effort, ambition, the potential impact of the ideas or the commitments, whether they were risky or not risky to implement, whether they were specific or broad, how easy something would be to institutionalize, whether, how much government buy-in there might be. So these are all sort of variables and dimensions that we thought would be important for the committee to keep in mind as we're evaluating the ideas that come in. Next slide. And so these are some other just questions and topics for consideration that were raised during this back and forth discussion by the committee members. We wanted to engage relevant agencies when we're thinking through commitments that intersect with their work. But whether or not they show up to these discussions, we thought shouldn't drive the advisory committee's work. We should be careful about our posture on whether the agency shows up affecting the likelihood of including that commitment in the NAP or not. We were discussing that maybe we should prioritize open government related initiatives specifically, since historically they haven't always been at the forefront of the national action plans. And that would be some progress if we could really emphasize open government and make sure that everything had an open government lens. One of the members asked if we find a gap in the recommendations that are submitted to the committee, how do we resolve it? Should we resolve it? Noting, as Daniel mentioned earlier, we're not limited to only considering the recommendations submitted to us, and we're also not limited to all of these ideas being molded into a national action plan. There are ways that the committee can take action on any of these ideas or fill in these gaps between commitments in the national action plan, but also through all the other mechanisms that we've talked about and will continue to. One of our members mentioned that there's a diversity of members in the committee that are in states, districts, cities, not just federal, or thinking about federal level reform. So that we might want to consider incorporating a subnational element in our commitments and recommendations. And of course, OGP through OGP Local has been emphasizing the value and agility of local reforms. So it's something to keep in mind. We also discussed whether we should establish an accountability practice that is our own response to commitments, whether or not i.e., if there's commitments, should we then at the end of the process or whatever publish a analysis of why something wasn't included, why it wasn't judged as open government. If agencies aren't coming to the table, should we try and establish some sort of accountability mechanism where we are informing the public to that extent? What do we do? That was one other question. And again, at the bottom, what can we do with ideas that don't neatly fit in a national action plan? The FAC should feel free to say certain things that ought to happen. I think that was a general agreement across the preparatory meeting. Even if there's no way it can be included in a national action plan, we discussed an idea of having some sort of bucket or a pile of important open government proposals on the side that are good ideas, but which might not fit in the actual action plan. Things that we can pursue in tandem or in parallel. Next slide, please. And so just some key takeaways here before I open it up to the rest of the committee. One, we thought that it would be important to focus on defining the problem, how the recommendation would make things different. Two, it's okay to set modest goals for ourselves and expectations. Three, we want to work towards a transparent, defendable inclusion criteria. And four, trying to analyze effort versus impact might be especially useful as a framework, but there's plenty of other variables we might want to consider. So that's it from me. I'll open it up to other members of the preparatory meeting if you've all got anything to add, if I missed anything. And if not, I'll pass it back to Daniel. Thank you.
So are there other folks from the preparatory meeting that would like to speak about anything that relates to the committee evaluation, the evaluation process? Okay. One, Kirill, I thought that was a great summary of what was discussed. And you know, I attended the preparatory meeting, and I was particularly struck by the quadrants approach. I think it was really a helpful framework to think through it. I'm just looking to make sure that we have. Corinna, are you still here? So she was the one who had suggested it. I was going to hand it over to her to chat about, but I don't. She may have stepped away for the moment. So when she's back, we'll come back to her. But I thought that was a particularly useful way of thinking about these things. I just want to open up to the group. I know this was a lot to digest. You're not going to be asked making decisions about any of what you just heard today, right? Like this is just a starting point. But if folks have questions about the report back that, you know, on the committee evaluation process, that or questions for Carol or for anyone who's there, this is a great time, or other things that you're thinking about that relates to how do we evaluate ideas for inclusion or exclusion in our recommendations. This is a great time to raise those. So just raise your hand and I'll be happy to recognize you. You all can't be that shy. Okay. So I don't see anyone. So what I think is might be a useful next step that I'd like to propose is this framework makes sense, at least to me, of thinking through it. Like this is kind of high level thinking. I thought the presentation from Pepe at OGP was really helpful in the framework that they use. Also, the quadrant approach that Karina had talked about was super useful. I think that it might be helpful, particularly in light of a presentation that's coming up later from the OGP Secretariat in terms of like some of the recommendations that have been received, to ask the folks at the preparatory meeting to go back and to start playing with this a little bit, to sort of suggest all right, these are really good themes, but how would we operationalize it? Like, is it a spreadsheet with a bunch of weights? Is it a grid and you put things on there? Like, I don't know. I don't want to assume what the answer would be. But I think that might be a useful next step. And of course, folks who attended the prior meeting or wish to attend this preparatory meeting, I think should be able to do so. Carol, can I impose on you to pull together, and I'll help you do so with Arthur. So another preparatory meeting to start figuring out like, what would this look like in practice? Is that a fair request to make of you?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to do so.
Okay. Do you folks think that do you folks agree with this approach, or do folks have concerns with this approach? I see some nodding heads. If you have, if you feel strongly yeah, Charlie, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to just say thank you for the presentation, doing the work, doing the thinking. I think having the OGP presentation was a great idea. I think that we can be as formal or as informal as we want to be with these, right? If we want to have a spreadsheet, like you suggested, Daniel, with some weights, we can certainly do that. Or if we just want to use these things as North Stars and have them be able to guide our discussion so that when we're looking at and thinking through consideration, we're just making sure that we are systematically considering all of these things, I think that's fine too. But I fully support the direction where this is headed. I do think that typing it up or having something that's a little bit more formalized so that we understand what each of these things are and how we might think about them would be helpful. But I just think that this is phenomenal and great, and we're definitely on the right track.
Awesome, thank you. Amy?
I just want to echo that as well, and that I support it, and I appreciate the work done by the other members. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else wish to weigh in? Okay, so here's what I'm going to propose, and then we can vote on it. So what I suggest is that Kirill be asked to pull together another preparatory meeting or set of meetings as he thinks appropriate, to report back to the full group later on, to look to see whether there's a way to formalize, or to figure out whether it makes sense to formalize, and if so, to come back with some suggestions about ways to formalize this great series of recommendations, of report backs that he had from the prior meeting. So basically, to go off, have a preparatory meeting or more. For folks who want to participate, they can email me and Arthur and Carol, and we'll get you connected, and we'll have a meeting, and that will come back with something more formally to be reported for a possible rubric. I think I said that well enough. Carol, go ahead.
Thanks. And just to clarify, because these will be preparatory meetings will still be bound by the both quorum restrictions and sort of deliberative restrictions, right?
So I've got good news on that.
Oh.
So it turns out that the quorum restriction was not a thing. We thought it was a thing. So as many people from all of us who want to participate can participate in the preparatory meeting. But unfortunately, GSA rules prevent preparatory meetings from being open to the public. It is possible to invite outside folks to come and present, but then when they finish the presentation and conversation, they have to leave. This is one of the reasons why I ultimately want to get the subcommittees going, because then we can actually do this in public. Arthur, did I misstate anything, or did I get this right?
No, you have it right. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Great. All right. So motion is on the floor. If you think that we should have Kirill go and gather together other folks who are willing and report back whether and what a slightly more formal mechanism might look like, say yes. And if you think that if you disagree, say no. And of course you can abstain if you want. And Arthur, would you mind doing the roll, please?
Sure. So 8.
Yes, Adeodutola.
Amy,
Yes.
Bobby,
Yes.
Charles,
Yes.
Karina, Daniel,
Yes.
Joyce,
Yes.
Kirsten,
Yes.
Stephen,
Yes.
Janice,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Kirill,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
and Suzanne.
Yes.
Okay. If I count that right, that's 14 yes, 0 no's, and 1 non-voting.
That's correct.
I would offer for a motion to reconsider, but I don't think we need to be that much of a that much fun. But if folks have concerns with the way the vote came out, for this or any other vote, always feel free to raise your hand and I'll recognize you. So, all right, so we're gonna move on. We've got the final report back, which I'm gonna do. This is on the community engagement, and then we will take, after we do this segment here, we will take a 10-minute break, because I'm sure everybody would be excited to get up and run around and do whatever. The community engagement preparatory meetings purpose was to gather information and conduct research on how to best engage with the public concerning committee operations. John was honchoing this process, but he wasn't able to make the preparatory meeting. Arthur helped coordinate it, and I will be the one who's doing the report back. I do want to flag that John has a number of really excellent ideas on how to improve the public participation process, and I want to circle back on that. But for now, I'm just going to sort of walk through the report back, and we're going to actually, do you mind? We'll just skip the slides, because I've got some notes and I'll just talk them through. We can just advance. Yeah, here we go. This is great. All right, so there were more things to cover than there was time to cover those items. The ones that we were able to have a discussion on were as follows. One has to do with so let me just back up. This is about, like, how do we get in comments from the public? How do we communicate back to the public? Like, what's the mechanisms of how all of this works? Because we haven't established any of those things. So this was really nuts and bolts. So I'm going to summarize the sort of the weight of where folks were, but of course, as a group, we can decide whatever we think makes the most appropriate. There are a number of things that we weren't able to address, so we'll probably need another preparatory meeting to address those things, but I wanted to get these initial ones just sort of out of the way. So the first question was, all right, currently we're having these monthly meetings. How much time should we allot these meetings for public comment? And there was a lot of conversation about how it's done elsewhere. Where it seemed to me that the weight of it was is that we should make available up to 30 minutes at our regular meetings and allow for up to 3 minutes per person for an oral comment. There's always the opportunity for the public to submit written comments to ogfac@gsa.gov, and we should encourage people to do that. And we also may wish to consider holding a specific meeting devoted to public feedback. So like we could have like a big listening session. But at least at these meetings, maximum of 30 minutes with 3 minutes per person seemed to be about right. I'm just going to go through these and we'll go back through them individually. So second question was, how do you let people know that the meetings are happening? GSA, of course, is already providing notice for these meetings through listservs, through the Federal Register, through LinkedIn, through press release. The weight of the group seemed to also encourage committee members to share announcements of meetings on their social media. That also encourages people to submit written comments or to request to make an oral comment. Another issue that came up, don't worry, there's only 5 of these. Another issue that came up was responding to verbal comments. And the weight of the group seemed to be that responding to verbal comments at meetings would be challenging. There's no individual committee member that can speak for the committee. That the way that we speak is by voting or by issuing recommendations. And the best way to show people about how comments are being used is in how we formulate our recommendations. So if we show, like if we have a rubric that says that you made this comment and we looked at your comment and it was great and we incorporated or it didn't fit and we did, like that is a way of showing people that we're actually listening and engaging with what they're saying. But we should, of course, acknowledge receipt of communications. We can't always say like what we think until we vote. Now for responding to written public comments, so written public comments are published on GSA's website and they're distributed to all of us. Again, it's the same issues, like it's tough speaking as the committee. We obviously should acknowledge when we receive comments to show, and we should also show like how they're being incorporated. There was support for, and I think Amy had talked about this at a previous meeting. No, it was Dr. Honey who had suggested this. Using tools like IdeaScale or Crowdicity, I think I said it right, to allow the public to comment, to allow people to respond to each other's comments, and even for members of the Federal Advisory Committee on a personal basis to engage with that as well. There was a question about like logistics, like GSA would have to provide support for this to maybe a funding issue. It's something that we can work out in the background about whether it's actually possible to do something like this. But that would be a good way to have engagement with the written comments if they're put on a platform like this. But as a group, like we don't really know what we think until we vote, and then our vote indicates what we think. And for recommendations that will largely show up again, what Kirill is going to help get for us, like the rubric and the response to that. So I won't be writing letters in response to like comments that are received, that type of thing. But we will be showing our work, and we will explore using tools like IdeaScale and otherwise to have like a more engaging process. So those were the ones that we worked our way through. There was a bunch that we did not address just for brevity. I'm gonna just go through them quickly so that you know what we didn't get to, which will have to be discussed. How do you reach out and engage with people who are under-engaged or have issues with engaging? Who to invite to submit ideas to the committee or to present? How do we engage with things like the Open Government Google group or comments on YouTube or comments in the live chat? How do we review and organize these comments? This is in part goes to like what we were talking about with Kirill. How do we support government officials engaging? How to demonstrate that, how to encourage feedback from the public that takes into account the hard choices and the trade-offs, right? Everybody wants rainbows and puppy dogs, but like if you can only have rainbows or puppy dogs, like how do you make people indicate what the weight of their preference is? And then finally, I think this is the hardest one, which is how to demonstrate that ideas are being taken seriously. So those are being held in abeyance for a future conversation. So with that, one, I'd like to open it up to if there are other folks who are at the community engagement preparatory meeting who'd like to weigh in on any of these things or things that we're discussed or not discussed, this is a great opportunity to do so. So I just want to give the floor to you. If Janice or anyone else, like if you guys want to speak up, this is a great opportunity to do that. Just raise your hand. Okay, not seeing anyone at the moment. Opening it up to everyone. And just as a point of process, like what I will do is after we have a general discussion, I'll go back for each of these recommendations, and we're going to vote on each of these recommendations to put them into place, assuming that folks think that makes sense. But I want to open up for like general conversation about like any of this if folks have views that they'd like to express. Josh.
This is like the toughest problem, I guess, for every government body, and I don't know whether there's a good solution. I think I worry about having the appearance of having a participatory structure, but not actually having a participatory structure. So the idea that people would be offered 3 minutes to talk, but that we wouldn't, but we wouldn't respond, right? I feel like that is the appearance of participation, but really maybe not an effective way. That it wouldn't really serve anybody to recommend that they do that, right? And maybe just written comments, not to say one or the other, but that written comments might be just the more effective way for people to be on the record, engaging with us in a way that's not going to get any direct response anyway. So I guess I might make a counter proposal that we not do 3 minutes if we're not going to have an opportunity to respond, and maybe limit it to 1 minute. But really encourage people to, have a longer discourse in a written form. Or alternatively, that we also make space for a time where we actually can have an interaction with people. I would love to have more interaction with people, although it would take a lot of time.
Thank you for the comment. But I'm not going to engage with it substantively. No, I'm just kidding. Good, everyone's awake. All right, Kristen.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Josh about the allowing for written ones, and letting people express as much as they want, unlimited in that forum, but feel very strongly that we should have 3 minutes for public comment, because these comments really aren't about us in a sense. And there'll be a lot of advocates in civil society who want to have their voice heard and can use that 3 minutes for other purposes and all that. So I think it's important we create the space and give people the stage, and 3 minutes is still pretty short. But it's enough to, I think, make a compelling argument. I do like Josh's suggestion a lot of, is there a way we could have some interaction? And I know one of the things we were talking about in the pros and cons of that is we definitely want people to have their time and not feel like we on the committee are defensive or counteracting or disagreeing or whatever. It's like the time for the public to express and speak truth to power and what needs to be done and what their priorities are. So I think if we gave full 3 minutes and let people go through, and then after that, if there was maybe a period of more interactive, that would be good, but not immediately after. So it doesn't become a right, wrong, two different views back and forth that could negate people feeling heard. So just some big picture thoughts. And then one other thing on the technology front, and how we could have meaningful input from the public, using kind of some of the platforms like IdeaScale, Crowdicity, and those ideas management ones. Are there examples internationally in the Open Government Partnership where the process a priori says we're going to include the top 3 commitments from the public in our action plan, or whatever it's going to be? Maybe it's just the top 1, but if we set up this framework for idea management and the public really engages and say they are voting on each other's or doing all that, could we ahead of time say, here's the people's choice and put in the top 3? And I don't know if other places have done that, if that's allowed.
So I didn't see who was next. I think Joyce is next. Just to respond to that last thing, and I apologize for doing so. We did that in the US, right? That was President Obama had We the People, right? Where if you got a certain number of votes, then the president would address it. So like there is at least precedent in the US context, and we can talk to Pepe or others who may know international context. But my goal is not to respond to each person, so I apologize. Joyce, you're up, please.
I think Kristen has raised 3 points that I was going to raise, so I agree totally with that. First, on the issue of the response, we thought that it was important that we do not portray ourselves as countering the opinion of the public. The only other addition that I would make to that is if an opportunity for interaction is important to us concerning maybe comments that have been made. Maybe we propose for a meeting outside that meeting, maybe like a general forum day for interactions with the public. Might be something to consider.
Excellent, thank you. Janice?
Hi, everyone. I really like that idea of the general forum day, Joyce. And I think Josh makes a good point. I think it's important to find a way on how to avoid making this a one-way conversation in terms of engaging with the public. I would love to find a way on how we can interact with the public, however that looks like. That could be for further discussion. And my third point, I have 4 points in total. My third point is referring back to how to let people know we're listening. I was thinking we could do more than acknowledging folks. We can extend that and maybe, or expand that and say, maybe you could refer back to this product that we have worked on before, that GSA has touched on before, and keep in touch with the work that we're doing. Just so it kind of extends more as like, oh, we have this is a receipt that we've listened, but we're not going to tell you the next steps. I think it's important to extend an olive branch to the public to keep in touch with us. And my fourth point, I kind of thought of this when you were talking about the preparatory meetings and how to spread awareness and how to reach hard to reach communities to participate in government. I think if we can invite external like stakeholders to our meetings, I think education is a large part of expanding awareness and how to communicate and engage with the government. So I think if we can invite some educators, I think that would be really helpful.
Great, thank you very much. Charlie?
Thank you. I thought it might be helpful once we formalize and agree on our evaluation criteria, just tying some things together here, that we communicate that out in our notices, in our open meetings, and that to the extent that individuals are taking 3 minutes to share orally or submitting ideas in a written format or responding to a Federal Register notice, that it would be helpful for those individuals, to the extent that they have an idea or a recommendation, to potentially frame that idea and recommendation with some awareness of the evaluation criteria that we're using, right? So you said that we all want everyone's puppies and rainbows, right? So if we're hearing from the National Canine Association and they have some ideas for how they think we could do a better job of engaging dog owners, coming with a framework that we're going to then use to understand the potential impact of their ideas or how those ideas tie into a broader policy initiative, that would be very helpful, as opposed to just, coming with an idea and sort of dropping the mic afterwards.
That's a very good point. Are there other folks who would like to weigh in? Are the folks who've already spoken who would like to respond? Okay, so I think, so I'm hearing a couple of things, and one is the concern that I often have when I go to meetings, which is like the idea of like people being in listening mode, right? Anyone ever had that experience? You go to a government meeting and they're like, we're not here to talk to you, we're just in listening mode. Like, it's infuriating. Nobody likes that. But we also are a collective we, so it's hard to respond. I think that one, as we develop a rubric, showing the rubric that we're using so that people know how to write things that fits what we're doing. I'm stealing all of your good ideas, I'm just reframing it. That is a useful way to show engagement. I think that I'm hearing that folks do like the idea of having some sort of either before the meeting or after the meeting or an online mechanism or something where we can engage on a one-on-one basis so people can have a conversation and it's not, you know, just 15 people in boxes staring at you. Like that is a useful thing. I'm hearing that it's good to invite outside folks to come and speak, and this is something that we'll be getting at later. It's later on the agenda, so like I'm glad that we're all sort of aligned. And I'm hearing that there is performative value in having oral comments. In addition to, you know, like in addition to like the actual communication that takes place, and some people are better communicators verbally than they are in writing, that there is value in having, you know, having the public communicate that way. And I think GSA regulations require public comment, like in-person comment at the meetings anyway. The question is like how much, you know, how long and how many and how long, like what duration and like how long per person. So with that, actually, I will pause there. Is that a fair summary of what's been said, or are there things that I missed, or other things that people would add? Okay, it seems like people are generally comfortable. If you're not, raise your hand or put something in the chat or text me or whatever, jump up and down or something so I'm trying to be responsive. So let's go back. I think based upon what was said, that one, that people seem to be, and I'm gonna hypothesize here a little bit, like it seems that the 30-minute, up to 30 minutes, but up to 3 minutes per person is unobjectionable to folks. That people, you know, that people don't have a concern with that. So instead of doing the roll call, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say without objection. So like if people have a concern with that, then we can go and have a vote on it. Oh, okay. Well then, I appreciate it. All right. You object to my mechanism, or you object to that particular item? No, I'm just kidding. Josh, do you want to say a little more, please?
I mean, I'm going to vote against a 3-minute proposal.
Oh, okay.
If that's where we are, right? So,
do you have a counter proposal that you'd like to offer?
I counter one. I'm going to get outvoted, I think. So I don't need to belabor the point, right? But that's where I am. I would much rather see we focus on, you know, the public engagement day type idea or something like that than have spend more time per meeting.
So I'm going to negotiate a little bit, and folks, if this is wrong, like tell me this is wrong. And Joyce, I'll get to you in 1 second. What if it's 3 minutes, but we also try to have at least one like either in person or virtual, or how we'll figure out a way to do it. But we'll have a public engagement meeting where the purpose is to do more than just that. Would that work for you? If not, that's okay.
I think I would rather just get outvoted. I mean, I want the public engagement part, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think we should do the public engagement part anyway. Like, yeah. I'm just trying to segment it.
Yeah.
Joyce.
Right. I just wanted to clarify provide some clarification to Josh on how we came about the 3-minute rule. I don't know if you've attended some of these public meetings and how, you know, some of them are structured. So I would say maybe we could put in the language something about the agenda, because there are times where you have a very non-contentious, light agenda. People can take, maybe you have 3, 4, 5 people that have expressed some interest in, you know, providing public comment. In that case, you can remove the time limit. But there are times where you have, you know, a contentious agenda and you have maybe 50 people in the public that have expressed some kind of interest in providing feedback. If there is no time limit on how much people could engage in such situations, you could have the situation where you're there all day.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I propose like a smaller time limit, like a 1-minute time limit. I'm going the other way. I've tried to, I want to make sure that we have time to do our work and are not spending time on things that I think may not be meaningful. Because we can't respond to things.
Okay. Joyce, did you want to respond, or are you good?
I think I'm good.
Okay.
I mean, if we have engagement, I mean, the more the merrier. We want people to engage. It's just a structure. Maybe just put some language there in terms of, you know, the structure of the meetings, because I believe the meetings are limited to time as well. So we won't spend all day in some meetings. So if you have a 60-minute meeting and one person wants to provide 30 minutes feedback, how do you structure that? So you must provide some structure to how the meetings run.
Okay, so this is good. So, and I think John has a good suggestion, which is, oh, sorry, I don't mean to editorialize. John has a suggestion, which I think is good. Allowing flexibility by deferring to the chair depending on the situation. So that way, so here, let me revise. So 30 minutes, 3 minutes per, with discretion provided to the chair to come back around if someone gets cuts off, if we still have the time that's available, and if it's in the chair's opinion, like on topic. So if someone wants to talk about things that are not related, then I can exercise the discretion that I have under the rules. Does that seem generally fine for folks? I know, Josh, this is not where you want in terms of time, but does it work otherwise? All right, so I'm going to put it to a vote. So chair, 3 minutes per, 30 minutes total, with discretion to the chair, depending on the circumstances. We're going to move to a vote. Arthur, would you call the roll, please?
Aid?
Hey.
Yeah.
Thank you. I suppose. Yes.
Okay. Amy?
Yes.
Bobby?
I'm a yes.
Charles?
Yes.
Karina?
Yes.
Daniel?
Yes.
Joyce?
Yes.
Christian? Stephen?
Yes.
Janice?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Josh?
No, sorry.
Kirill?
Yes.
Ron?
Yes.
And Suzanne?
Yes.
Thank you. So if I counted that right, it's 13 aye, 1 nay, and 1 non-voting. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next element, which is, I think that there's general agreement, but you guys will let me know that we should have some sort of a specific meeting devoted to public feedback. We don't know what that is yet. Like it could be in person, it could be virtual. We'll have to figure it out. But like that would be a useful thing to do as well. Does anybody have a concern with that? Or just want to speak to that point? Okay, I'm seeing no. So I'm going to do this by unanimous consent, but if you object, there's nothing wrong with object. Like we don't have to all agree. What Josh did like before, like thank you for speaking your mind. Like that is totally fine. So I don't want people to feel any pressure. But with that said, I'm going to do this by unanimous consent. So does anybody object to that we'll have a meeting that's specifically focused to receiving public feedback and engaging with folks? Okay, without objection, motion is carried. So the next item, don't worry, folks, we'll be taking a break in just a little bit. We're almost there. So the next element of that is responding to verbal comments at the meeting. I think the answer to that, I think where we were was generally no. That at the meeting, that is not a thing that we will respond to verbal comments. Am I Is that right? Am I missing something? That's right. And you can, so, all right. Raise your hand if I'm hitting the wrong place or if you would like to speak.
That was my understanding that we would not respond to verbal comments.
Okay, so I'm going to do this by unanimous consent. If someone disagrees, it's totally fine. We are not going to, as a policy, we will not respond to verbal comments for the oral presentations portion of the meeting, either individually or collectively, like at that time, without objection. So if you object, just raise your hand or speak up. Okay, motion carries. Two more, actually, I think it's the, oh, I don't think we need to vote on this one, but this will just be a request that how do we let people know that the meetings are happening in addition through the listservs and whatever. Committee members will be encouraged to announce or share it through their networks or through their social media or however they want to do that. I don't think we need to vote on that. I don't think that's a thing that's necessary, but if you think we should vote on it, raise your hand. Nobody finds me funny. Fine.
I just,
please.
Dan, I had a request that when you send meeting invites out, it should be in the form of a meeting invite, because for me, I just look at my calendar, and if there's an email with a link saying that I have a meeting, I don't say it. If I don't remember to copy it and create a meeting invite for myself in my calendar. So I always miss all meetings that someone just sent me an email and put a link in that email, because yeah, I think I missed some meetings because that was what happened. So
okay.
Just
so Ade, what I'm hearing from you, for when we do invitations for meetings, 1, there should be an email. 2, there should be a separate calendar invite, and in the email there should also be, here's how you can promote this on social media. Is that a good summary of what you said?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, just a meeting invite. Yeah, just a meeting invite that goes on my calendar. That would be helpful.
Okay, got it. And I'll work with Arthur and Daniel.
Thank you.
Others. I know there's been some technology issues for some folks, so we'll try to make sure that that gets addressed, because I know that there were some issues with how the different agencies, the federal side, like how they interface with the invitations. Final item. Sorry, I'm scrolling back to make sure I get it. Responding to written public comments. It seemed like there is support for exploring whether or how we could use a tool like IdeaScale or Crowdicity to allow for public comment and for interactive comments in that fashion. If that is not an accurate summary, or if folks would like to weigh in, this is a good time to do so. Just like raise your virtual hand and I will gladly recognize you. Josh.
I'm sorry for being the contrarian today. I will try not to do that every time. I guess my concern here is that at least the SGEs, the public members, we're here to provide our expertise. I'm not here to be a clearinghouse for other people's comments, I guess, right? I think that those collaboration tools would be better housed at GSA, not within the OGFAC. I guess would be my perspective.
Great, thank you. Do other folks want to weigh in? Okay. Oh yeah, Joyce.
I guess my question to Josh is there going to be, if that is the case, say we agree on that, is there going to be a protocol for addressing contentious issues? Like are we providing an opinion, or are we acknowledging feedback?
I mean, I think we, well, we're here to provide the best advice that we can all provide, right? And if we know about alternative opinions and we think that those are valid opinions, we should include those in our, in our votes that contribute to our group recommendations. So, if the ideas that we know to be good, we should be promoting. and I don't think it's our job to be a clearinghouse for, I think we're here to, to provide those recommendations. I'm not sure. I don't know if that really.
I acknowledge your point. I'm just wondering if the time, I thought, my understanding of how we would respond was via the recommendations we will provide by policy, right? So in the time, so once the people provide their comments, I thought at the point of writing our recommendations and policy is our response. It's not like we're clearing house for their comments. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I don't know if is that back to Daniel?
I mean, to the House or
Yeah,
to
right.
Or I think I can add some clarity. We are not the multi-stakeholder forum. The multi-stakeholder forum, to the extent it exists, is GSA's Open Government Secretariat. They have run their process completed a few weeks ago, I think. And one thing that we'll speak about later today will be the sum total of the comments that were received through the Federal Register process. The comments that were received were focused on what should be included in the NAP6. Our work embraces and includes the NAP6, but it also goes further and addresses other open government issues, particularly on those which are emerging. So we are not the clearinghouse, but we can encourage people to be able to respond to one another to help create better suggestions that come into us. So one mechanism by which we receive suggestions is through emails to ogfac@gsa.gov. But in getting that, it's not an iterative process. So if I suggest that we should have, to go back to my terrible example, that we should have puppy dogs, and someone says, and someone responds to it, yeah, puppy dogs, but with rainbow collars, right? There's no way to have that type of interaction in the way that we have our mechanism set up. There isn't this public ability to engage in refinement. So I think the idea is that this would support or allow for people to respond to one another, to be able to refine comments. On the other hand, we don't have to do that, right? We are an independent advisory committee. We don't have to listen to what anybody else says. We can generate our own recommendations, and we will. And we are not obligated in any fashion to listen to what other folks say. We can take we're not a clearinghouse, but there may be value in having a process by which people who are submitting comments can respond to one another's comments, or we can individually respond to them. So sorry, that was a long-winded response, but does that, I'll get to Suzanne in a second, but does that clarify for you, Josh?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Suzanne.
Hi, thanks, Daniel, for all of that. And Josh's comments, the conversation I think is really interesting. Could you clarify what you see the role as the Federal Advisory Committee and the multi-stakeholder forum? You were explaining you thought those were two separate entities, and I would love some clarity on that.
To whom is that question addressed?
I think to you, Daniel.
Oh,
because you just said the FACA is not the multi-stakeholder forum, that's at GSA. So I was trying to understand what, maybe you misspoke, but I was trying to understand what that meant.
No, and I'm gonna throw this at the GSA folks in just a second, but my understanding is, and this could be incorrect, but my understanding is the multi-stakeholder forum process is that which is managed by the GSA Open Government Secretariat. The role of the Federal Advisory Committee is to provide independent advice to the GSA administrator regarding the National Action Plan and regarding emerging open government issues. We are close to what a multi-stakeholder forum could look like, but because of the way the Federal Advisory Committee is structured, we are not that. It is a separate and distinct thing. However, we have a lot of flexibility so that we can take on, to the extent that we wish to, characteristics of what a multi-stakeholder forum might look like. So bringing in other folks and putting our imprimatur on their ideas is something that we can totally do. But that is how we ourselves determine the scope and nature of our mission. And Dan York, if you are still on, which I think you are in the background, I'm going to put you on the spot to correct me for all the things that I've misstated. So the floor is yours.
Great. No, I think you're largely right. So obviously the U.S. public is larger than the Federal Advisory Committee. There's lots of folks out there with a lot of great ideas. At the end of the day, it's the government's role to write the National Action Plan and the Federal Advisory Committees to help advise the GSA administrator on the recommendations that should be included in the National Action Plan, among other things. So to the extent that the Federal Advisory Committee wants the comments from the public, wants expert advice from agencies, wants to see the results of the RFI or other things, all of that is within your purview to be able to write the best advice possible for the GSA administrator. And then we take that along with the other considerations and then put the National Action Plan together. Does that clarify some or no? Or did I manage to dodge the question adequately enough? I should turn off
Suzanne,
the
does
mic.
that help? Or do you want to ask more?
I'll just think it through, because this is, that relationship is, I think that's the crux of what we're trying to figure out. And I think it's helpful to understand, but I don't have more comments at this time.
Thank you. I mean, for what it's worth, and I don't want to anticipate our recommendations, but one thing that's in the back of my head is bootstrapping a better process. That is not the open government. That is not the Federal Advisory Committee. It's like there's a bunch of constrictions on the Federal Advisory Committee and what we can do and how we operate. And there may be space for one of our recommendations to be how do we support a better version of a multi-stakeholder process. So I'm already running into a bunch of technical problems and how we do some of the things that we do. So I think this is a way to get closer to what that vision is. But the structure of the FOC makes it hard to do some of that stuff. So that's not responsible. That's sort of what's in the back of my head. And Josh, I see you have your hand up. Is there something else oh, okay. All right. So
I don't know why the hand is still up. I can't lower it.
Oh, I'll see if I can help you. Nope, I can't help you. Sorry. Someone else will have to do that. Why don't, in light of the conversation, let's defer. Unless folks disagree, we can defer until next time. The question, no, actually, I take it back. We should have a vote on whether to ask GSA about IdeaScale and those other tools and get that going, at least so that we'll have more information so we can make a decision next time. So with that, I will make a motion that we will ask GSA to investigate the use and implementation of these tools and to report back to the Federal Advisory Committee on whether it's possible to use things like IdeaScale and Crowdicity, and if so, what that would entail.
So Dan, if I may, we already are, so you're happy to vote on such things, but the outcome of the vote is not dependent on us already doing what we're doing.
In that case, unanimous consent. Does anybody object to us asking GSA to do what they're already doing? Awesome. With that, only 13 minutes behind schedule, we will take our break. Thank you all so much. We will be back. It's 2:44 Eastern time, so we will be back at 2:54 Eastern time. Thank you all for your patience as we work through this.